Good evening and welcome to Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, along with the silent assassin Matt Costa, Stephanie Burke, and guest host tonight, John Brightman. We are here to talk with you about the paranormal, as we are each and every Saturday night. We are streaming live on Spooky TV at SpookySouthCoast.com, as well as on YouTube, not on the radio. College football. So tonight, you have us just over the internet, which means we can say whatever we want. And we will. We'll say all kinds of things that we're not supposed to. That's what we do here. And of course, we'll talk about snacks at some point. That's the whole point of the
Spooky
show.
Snack Coast.
People aren't tuning in to hear about the ghosts anymore. They just want to hear about what different foods we had over Thanksgiving. So we'll get into some of that, I'm sure, at some point. Oh, let me turn that off. So I think we got everything going. I think I have everything correct. We'll find out. We'll find out as we go along. But Stephanie's back in the studio.
I am officially back. It's been way too long.
We've gotten new carpets since you were gone.
You know what? I've been staring at those for a while and thinking to myself, something's different. But they look like they already got messed up.
They did. That happened the day they went in.
No way.
Yeah. The common theory around here is that the person who installed the carpet stepped in some of the glue and tracked it over the rugs.
Yep.
And I guess they're denying that. But
really?
Yeah. We tried to do an internal investigation, checked everybody's shoes.
Did you really?
To see who's... Michael Rock had everybody standing out there checking the bottom of their shoes.
That is hilarious.
And they filmed it. You can see it on the Fun 107 YouTube channel. But I think that it was definitely the installer, because it was happening like as he was doing it.
That's bizarre.
And now somebody's got to come in and clean it, and I guess that's turned into a whole thing. So, but they're in the process of putting new carpeting in all over the place, and then we're going to start jazzing up the studio. I don't know if you saw my handiwork over here.
I did not see your handiwork, but I did see that everything is missing, and this is brand new. So
a cabinet over here.
Well, that's only here till the rugs settle and they can put it back out.
This feels strange.
We took down all those pictures. I came in here and I scraped off all the tape with Goo Gone. So tonight's show is sponsored by Goo Gone.
Goo Gone. All right.
Because I used almost a whole damn bottle between that and the news booth window. But we got it all nice and clean. So this is what we do for you folks out there watching on Spooky TV. And if you are somebody who listens to the podcast and you've never listened live on Saturday nights, every Saturday night we have cameras set up all over the studio. Every Saturday night you can see our ugly faces. Well, except Stephanie. But the rest of us are, I'm including you in this, John. You're just as frightening on camera as you are in real life.
I try.
I mean that in a good way, though. The paranormal Shrek. Weren't you called that at one point?
What?
Yeah, a couple of people have called me.
No, I thought John's the one that mentioned it to me.
Yeah, somebody
really
did mention that to me and call me that. So
I'm just kidding. John's a good-looking guy. The ladies love John Brightman.
Nah.
Who doesn't? Come on now.
And we're going to get into some... Well, we know who doesn't love you. We're going to talk about that later on in the show.
I can't wait.
That'll be part of the topic for tonight. Because it's something that popped up over the last 24 hours or so, and it's something that we want to address just to set the record straight. And also because, Spooky South Coast is tied into what it is that you're doing, so we'll do some record straightening. I guess we'll use that phrase. We'll do some of that a little bit later on.
Awesome. And
we'll be joined also in a few moments by Ashley, our Week in Weird correspondent, for the first time in a while. She's been off the show almost as long as you have.
She has, and she's popped up to a few places that I've been at. So
well, that's
at times I'm guilty for stealing her.
Well, like last week, we're like, is Ashley doing the Week in Weird? And then we see pictures. We're like, no, she's not.
No, I stole her.
Even though
these people with their vacations,
even though
just
she could have taken 10
off.
minutes out of the night.
Oh yeah,
and just gone over and done it.
No, she was busy yelling at me because I read her in front of a group of people. So,
well, it happens.
Does it happen?
I don't know. You're the psychic. I don't do that stuff.
Right.
I'm just assuming that it happens.
Well, she was probably thinking it was not going to happen, so she sat in there. But I did steal her.
But even though we are streaming on YouTube, you can still call in during the show at 508-996-0500, 877-996-1420. You can also email us, spookycrew@spookysouthcoast.com. You can hit us up on Twitter @SpookySC or using the hashtag SpookyLive. And then we also have the chat room going on in Spooky TV as well. Chrissy says my face is so red. My face is medium red. It's like it's regular
Your face
red.
Is red?
Can
they see the red background behind you? Because that might be why.
She needs to adjust the settings on her video stream, maybe. I think I look perfectly fine. I used some of my beard soap because my beard finally got long enough, and I threw some conditioner in it. So maybe that's giving me a nice glow.
It looks the same as last time I saw you.
That's got to be longer. You haven't seen me in like a month. No,
Actually,
it's been like 3 weeks.
No, it's been longer. No, it hasn't. No, it's been like 2 weeks.
But the beard is still longer than it was.
I like it longer, though. I don't like it shorter.
I like to let it grow out so I can have everybody ask me to come play Santa Claus at their school. I'm like, thanks.
You can't do that yet.
Why can't he?
Because it's not white.
I actually looked into the process.
Didn't you really?
I looked into like what you have to do to whiten it. Yeah, because a couple of years ago, the first time I grew my beard out, I forget who it was, but some organization asked me if I would play Santa Claus. And I said, well, I really don't like doing it because I don't like people's kids sitting on my lap. It's weird. But I'll do it if you want me to do it. And so, because it's for a good cause,
right?
And so I was like, well, instead of having to wear the stupid like fake beard and all that stuff, let me look into what the process is of actually whitening your beard. I assume like that spray on snow that you can just like spray in your windows. Well, I assume they had something like that, like we use on Halloween.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like on Halloween, you put that green and blue spray. I thought they would have like a white spray to make Santa beards, but they don't. So I looked into the process of actually turning it white. It's not easy.
No. That white paint that I used on you guys for Halloween, that would be perfect for that. Because
put it in,
you can just put it in and it'll wash right out just as easy as it came off you guys for Halloween.
Well, anybody that wants me to play Santa Claus that just heard that, you forget you heard that.
Oh my God.
That was I still get compliments on that zombie appearance. So
I know.
We'll have to have to see if we can
try to hide those photos from the public.
See if we can get people to take on zombie Santa Claus.
Sorry.
Everybody
that would
sneezing.
work.
If you have to sneeze, like just raise your hand. I'll pull your mic down.
I'm sorry. It was unexpected.
It's all right.
It was
We're gonna when we get everything set up, you're gonna have sneeze and cough buttons.
Really?
It'll be the same button. It won't be like one for sneeze, one for cough.
I didn't think you were gonna give me separate ones. That wouldn't make sense.
So, but
when are we getting rid of the plants that I'm allergic to?
You have to talk to Phil about that.
Phil, please.
Those are Phil's plants. Phil loves his plants.
I can't breathe. And it's every time I come in.
All right, Ashley's in the chat room, so I'm going to assume that she's ready. So we'll bring her on, and we'll get weird with the Week in Weird. And then again, a little bit later on, we're going to be joined by our guest, Erika Mailman. She has written a novel called The Murderer's Maid, a Lizzie Borden novel. And she's done a lot of research into Lizzie Borden. So we're going to talk to her about all the research that she's done, about what the novel is about. And we'll talk about some of the stuff she's working on now and just some of her other interests in the field as well. But I just got the novel the other day in the mail, so I haven't had a chance to read it yet. But I was kind of thumbing through it, and it looks very interesting. And I love when people take real historical events and turn them into a novel. Oh, hey, let's not hit the microphone. Still need that. But so we'll talk to her about that coming up in just a few minutes. Let me just see if I can get Ashley on the phone here. All right. Well, what do you have for us this week?
So, anything that has the word spooky or haunted in the title is kind of our go-to type of thing. And then you add a graveyard into the mix, and we've got a party. At least in my eyes, we do. Titled, and I quote, "The World's Most Haunted Graveyards and Where to Find Them." I threw this up on our Twitter feed sometime last week, and everyone went nuts over it, so I thought it was best to bring it to you guys. I was on the website called the Occult Museum, which I was like, whoa, it's kind of creepy, but whatever. And they put together the most haunted graveyards. And now I'm thinking about taking a trip to all these places because, hello, they're cool looking and they're creepy. So I'm only going to name a few of them, and then you can go and relook at the link that's connected to it as well. Number one is called the Highgate Cemetery. It's in Swan Lake in London, England. There's the Bachelor Grove Cemetery in Illinois. So we're keeping it a little bit everywhere. We got Gray's Fair in Scotland. We have Catacombs in Paris. We have the Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut, which I've actually been to. And you just kind of drive by it and you get an eerie feel. And then you have one right here in Massachusetts, Howard Street Cemetery in Salem. So there's a lot more you guys can check out.
And one of them was the Union Cemetery, right, in Connecticut. And Jeff Belanger tells the story about that cemetery in our stage show, An Evening of Ghost Stories and New England Legends, where he actually grew up like right down the street from that cemetery. And so that's a very common legend where he lived. But Ed and Lorraine Warren also lived one town over. And Jeff knew them when he was a kid. And Ed Warren actually showed him video footage that he captured of the White Lady of Easton, the one who's seen in that cemetery. So,
yeah, it's like they like kind of like patrol the area a little more, so you gotta like watch what you do. But it's just like creepy to look at, and I like it.
And speaking of which, on a lot of those top haunted cemetery lists that you see out there, the Ellis Bowles Cemetery on Wolf Island Road in Rochester always makes it onto those lists. And we have to just remind everybody that's listening not to go into that cemetery. Don't go there legend tripping. Don't go there ghost hunting. The society that takes care of it does not want anybody trespassing in there at night. So I'm putting that caveat on your story.
Yes, that's most. Just go look at the website. You can watch videos and stuff like that and pretend you're there. It's great.
Right.
So I do have another story for you guys.
All right.
It comes from the Occult Museum again. It's called 8 Bizarre, Mysterious Photos That Have Never Been Explained. Now, myself being a photographer, I enjoy looking at different types of photos and how things are done. And then you mix the paranormal into it, and I'm just a happy camper because I like to prove everyone wrong, if I can. In the article, it shows 8 different photos that have been tried to be figured out, what they are, and a lot of them date back to where Photoshop didn't exist, so it's hard to tell whether they're overexposed and such. But the first one on the list was called the Bushka Lady, and it just doesn't make sense to me, as a person doesn't seem to look ghostly-like or have any paranormal connection to it besides from the article, so I was really confused. It stated that the Bushka Lady is nicknamed to give to the unidentified woman present in the early 1963, right before the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The woman appeared in numerous films that was captured in the final moments of Kennedy's life. She's seen standing holding a camera to her face, even though most of her surrounding witnesses had taken cover. Just odd things like that. The FBI still hasn't figured out who she is or may know who she was. And to this day, it's some mystery. And I just don't know what to make of it because back then, Photoshop wasn't a thing. Like, it was really hard to do. So to go out of your way to put yourself into a photo just kind of blows my mind. So just that's another link to look at. It's really great. There's a whole bunch of photos, like 8. I think it's 8, I said. But they go all over the place and just really neat to look at. So that's something you guys should check out.
All right. And one of the interesting things about when you're doing this kind of stuff, you see all this research that people put into things and all these stories and ideas they've put together. And we encourage anybody that's done anything like that, send it to us. So if you've written something like this, if you've put together a website or a blog on something like this, send it to us. Let us know. Keep us up to date on all this stuff because we can include that stuff in what we're sharing with the Week in Weird during the course of the week.
And I would love to read it, especially coming from someone personal. Like, it'd be really great. Absolutely. And then my last one is a Did You Know? And it has a photo to go with it. This makes me want to investigate the White House even more. It says, did you know Abraham Lincoln's ghost is the most popular ghost story in the White House? Lincoln's ghost is said to haunt the White House since his death and has been reported by over 20 different employees, residents, including First Ladies Harry and Truman, Teddy Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill. Now, you can imagine what's gone on in the White House over the years. So you add all of that stuff together, and you probably have like a really good paranormal hotspot because you just don't know what lurks around each corner. So, yeah, it's pretty cool, I think. So I'll throw that up on our Twitter later tonight, and you guys can check that out.
And Matt's got the Did You Know up on the screen right now.
There you go.
See?
And while you're also checking that out, you can check out our YouTube for our past shows, Instagram and Twitter, Facebook, to stay up to date with everything we do spooky.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yes, you will.
All
Bye.
Right. Have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
That is Ashley Turner, our Week in Weird correspondent, and we will definitely talk to her next week now that we can tell her how to talk to us even when she's out and about, and Stephanie can remind her how to do all that stuff.
I will, for sure.
So that, just if she can, it's not like she has to pull herself away if she's busy for doing it, but the people like the Week in Weird. Remember all those years that we stopped doing it? We would get emails every week. When's the Week in Weird coming back?
We got that for a long time. And I quit the Weekend Weird because I was terrible at it because I was pregnant and could barely stay awake when I started it.
It's not easy to do.
It's not, but especially when you're exhausted.
As somebody that reads news stories every day, it's not easy. It's definitely a skill that you have to work at, and so
you did give the best advice though.
What's that? What did I say?
I don't remember, but it was good at the time.
Oh, obviously, because you stopped doing it.
No, you were very good at coaching me to do it properly. I just couldn't stay awake.
The biggest problem I have with reading is that people don't listen as fast as I talk. So that's on them. That's not on me. I don't talk too fast. They just listen too slow.
There you go.
I got 3 minutes. I got to do what I got to do in 3 minutes.
Right.
With the Weekend Weird, you don't have 3 minutes. You have like 10 minutes, so you can take your time. It's a lot easier that way. All right. Well, we can jump right into things with our guest because she's on the line right now with us. And again, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. This is going to take up part of the show, and then part of it will be the last half hour or so. We'll be talking about some news that popped up over the last 24 hours. But at least for the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about Lizzie Borden and about this novel and about some other work. But anything that we're talking about, if you feel like you want to call in with any questions, 508-996-0500, 877-996-1420. But joining us on the line is our guest. Erika Mailman is an author of The Witch's Trinity, a San Francisco Chronicle notable book and Bram Stoker Award finalist, and Woman of Ill fame, a Pushcart Press Editors Book Award nominee. She's a Yaddo Fellow and lives in Northern California with her family, and she's joining us on the line right now. Well, thank you for joining us. I know it's been a little while that we've been trying to bring you on to the show, but I'm glad that it finally worked out and we were able to get you on.
Me too. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, anytime anybody wants to talk about Lizzie Borden, we're more than happy because we talk about Lizzie Borden all the time off the air. So
why not on the air?
It's worth bringing it on the air too. And Lizzie Borden shows, because we do this show on the south coast of Massachusetts, 20 minutes from the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast. It's a story that's close to our local listeners on the radio, but when we put out the podcast, when we put out the YouTube stream, all the stuff that we do that gets picked up around the world, people all over the globe are fascinated with this story still to this day. Is that what you've been receiving from people who have purchased the book? Is it something that has been, it's not just people in New England that are interested in the story, it's something that's international?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's definitely something that's stronger in New England, where people, I think, grow up hearing that jump rope rhyme that maybe on the West Coast it's not as prevalent. But pretty much anytime I do an event, I say, who has heard of Lizzie Borden? And like probably 98% of hands go up.
It really is. It's one of those, they call it the O.J. Simpson trial of its time, and it was. I mean, and it was at a time when gaining notoriety like that was not easy. It wasn't like people went home and turned on court TV every night to see what was going on with the Lizzie Borden trial. Right. These were stories that were picked up all over the world with just a handful of people covering the story in Fall River.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to think that most major newspapers actually sent a reporter across the country to sit there in that crowded little courtroom to transcribe the trial and report about it on a daily basis.
And it is one of those, when you read, I'm sure that you've gone through things like the Lizzie Borden source book and some of the original stories and all that. And it's amazing the way that they could write back then, because even though newspapers were supposed to be, supposed to be the free press that had its objectivity in place, it certainly wasn't the case with what they were writing about with this case. It was very emotional writing, whether they were trying to say Lizzie was guilty or innocent or what, but there was a very demonstrative writing of everything that was going on in the courtroom, and it seemed like there was a lot of judgmental writing there as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's a really florid kind of writing style and embroidering truth, perhaps, to have a more sensationalistic story. And I feel like I was just talking the other day to somebody about this, that journalism seems to have it had that period of time where it was almost like a newspaper story was sort of a cross between nonfiction and fiction, and it almost had a feel of fiction as it unfolded. And then, of course, we kind of hit the golden age of investigative reporting and fair and balanced reporting, where you really took care to make sure both sides were equally represented, and then it feels like we're kind of reverting back to a more sensationalistic form of journalism, especially since so much of our news is coming just on the ground from bloggers who are there or people who have their phone and record it and upload it, and it's just very subjective again in a way, whereas for a while there was a wonderful golden age of objective reporting, I think.
Well, when I read the Lizzie Borden stories and things from that era, I look back to, I'm a sports writer, is one of my many hats that I wear, and when you read historical sports writing, that was a big thing back then, was scene setting, putting people into the story, putting people into the moment. It wasn't so much about the facts as it was getting people the experience that they were missing by not being there, and I think that a lot of that same approach was brought to the trial. It was very much like, if it's almost like it was if it was on court TV, you're getting every little bit of minutia that went on. You're getting every outburst that somebody had. You're getting all of these fantastic details.
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting perspective, like the idea that they're trying to create the sense that you're there, which does involve kind of five senses reporting and not kind of a stripped down to the bare bones sentence that delivers information and very little else. I think you've put your finger on it, that there was kind of like an ambiance-based reporting where the feel of the courtroom may have been, or of the baseball stadium, may have been more important than getting the actual facts 100% correct.
So what was it about the Lizzie Borden story that drew you into it, that sparked your interest? Was it connected to the story that you came up with, or was the Lizzie stuff already festering before you came up with the idea for the novel?
Oh, I have been interested in her ever since I was a teen, and her being Lizzie Borden. And I guess I have kind of a macabre sensibility, and I'm interested in the dark side of human nature. And so I just thought that was such an interesting case. And I always knew I would write about her in a fictional way. And then a couple of things came together a few years ago, one of which was I was reading another author's historical novel, and she mentioned a Mr. Borden who was just a side character who maybe appeared for a couple of pages, and he had a textile factory. And I just kind of thought, oh my gosh, I bet she's going to go on to write about the Lizzie Borden case, because Lizzie's father, Mr. Borden, owned textile mills, among other endeavors. And I just kind of got this kind of like prickling sense along my spine, like she's going to beat me to it. I've got to get on it. And so that's when that was the trigger for me to say, like, well, it's time. I've got to jump on this story I always knew I was going to write about. And so I delved back into some research that I had already, done as a teen. And I realized that nobody was telling the story from Bridget Sullivan's point of view. And I thought that was just absolutely the kingpin, because the day that Mr. and Mrs. Borden were hatcheted to death, the only other person in the house that day besides them and Lizzie Borden was Bridget Sullivan. And certainly I know you've been in that house, Tim. You know how small and claustrophobic it is, and how difficult it would be for conversations to happen or bodies to fall to the floor without you hearing it from other vantage points in the house. So I really think Bridget was privy to a lot more than she ever told.
Let's not forget either that when it happened, it was August 4th, 1892. So it's probably a warm day. The windows are open. I know that Bridget was washing windows, but I'm sure windows were open while she was doing that. So you had to have heard what was going on inside.
Yes. When I took I stayed overnight in the bed and breakfast, was that 2 years ago now? And one of the things that our fabulous tour guide did, it was Colleen Johnson, I think is her last name. She was wonderful. Mm-hmm. And she said, I weigh about what Mrs. Borden weighed. And she just, standing there in the parlor, jumped up and down hard, and it made the floor shake. And she said, if Mrs. Borden was upstairs and was standing and took a blow and fell to the ground, you would feel that reverberating throughout the house.
Oh, absolutely.
There's no way you wouldn't have. And in fact, the shudder that the ground made, because she didn't tell us she was going to do that, I actually shrieked a little bit because it really was shocking to feel the ground shake like that. So definitely, Bridget, how could she not have been aware of that?
I mean, if I'm there,
I don't see it.
When
What
we're
do you
there,
think?
when we're there doing events, you know, it's either the winter time when the heat is on, or the summertime when the air conditioning is on. So there's always some degree of noise going on in the building. And so when we're having our events, I'll be on the 3rd floor and I'll just be talking to people and walking around, and people will say to me on the 1st floor, you know, can you quiet down, or can you stop clomping around? The sound travels in that house, and as much as you can hear because the walls are thin and the floors are thin, it also seems like everything kind of just reverberates in that house as well.
Yes.
So imagine how it must have
That was
been
my sense too. Yes.
1892, when you don't even have cars driving by to add into the noise. You have, you know, maybe the occasional horse and carriage coming by, but for the most part, it was a lot quieter than it is now. And if you can hear that stuff now, you definitely would have heard it back then.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, it's just a quieter time period. And so I got really interested in Bridget Sullivan as a lens to tell the story through. And I just found so many interesting things about her through my research and the research that others who have gone before me have done. And I, of course, have to give credit to several blogs, sites, and forums online that are just incredible, laborious places. That's not the right word. Laborious in the best sense of the word, that people have really duked over these details and added their own thoughts to some research. And they're fascinating to read through, and they're a great way to fact-check something quickly. And I'm just so grateful for those sources. One of the things that really interested me was Bridget's Irishness, because I think that's part of why she wasn't questioned so closely and why her areas of the house were not investigated. You know, this was a time period when the Irish immigrants were very scorned, and the time period where there were the signs in the windows of shops and businesses saying Irish need not apply. And
I mean,
I think she was, you know, the Irish people were really considered lower class. And so
they'd sooner question the dog about what went on than they would an Irish person.
Sort of got an out in terms of not being so very closely questioned. And it's interesting to me that the inquest testimony from Bridget is missing. I would just give any kind of amount of money to have that arise out of somebody's attic and be able to read through that. And some of the sort of vestiges that we can get from what the testimony might have said come through in the trial when attorneys kind of question her about things that she previously said at the inquest, and then she changes her story on them. As you know, like when, I guess in the inquest, we can surmise that she was saying when Lizzie called her down from the attic bedroom to say someone's come in and murdered father, Bridget testified that she had been crying, but by the time of the trial, a year later, she was saying, no, she wasn't crying. And of course, the attorney wanted her to keep saying that and make Lizzie seem less cold and chilly-hearted. It definitely would help her case if she had been sobbing and crying upon discovering her father's body. But Bridget just said, no, I don't know if I said that. I don't know why I would have said it because it's not true. She wasn't crying. So I definitely wonder what else is in the inquest testimony that she went back on later.
And Bridget would have been in a unique position, besides being one of the only people in the house at the time of the murders, but just in all the things that led up to it. In the prosecution trying to establish some kind of a motive, she would have been somebody who would have been there every single day, and they would have freely fought in front of her. All of these problems that the Bordens were having, they would have thought nothing about saying it out loud right in front of Bridget because, the servant was just the background. It was somebody that you didn't even give a thought to. So they would have had,
Yeah, they completely discounted her, and her presence in the house was, just of no value to them or of no notice to them. So yeah, I think she overheard many bitter arguments, and although my novel, The Murderer's Maid, is very highly researched, and I tried to get everything as historically accurate as I could, there was, of course, a point where I had to start inventing, and so some of those overheard fights and discussions were really fun for me to create out of whole cloth and insert in the book.
But that is the challenge, though, too, is because now you're trying to craft this character and trying to keep it as historically accurate as you can, but there's just not enough to really feel like you can take what's out there and craft her as a person, as a three-dimensional character in your novel. Do you feel like you were able to take what was out there and do justice to the real Bridget Sullivan?
Oh, I hope so. I mean, I really am so deeply fascinated by this story that I think, at least on the research end, I did justice to it, and I really struggle with certain details that were actually very minor, but it was important to me to hammer them down and get them right. And so hopefully that succeeds. There's also a modern day narrative in the novel. There's a woman named Brooke, and she is the daughter of a Mexican immigrant, and that's, for me, that was important to sort of talk about the issues of immigration through, what's going on modern day versus what was happening with Irish immigrants in the 1800s and sort of similar treatment. And so Brooke, the modern day character, she believes that her mother was murdered by some people who are now after her. And so she changes her identity every, a couple of times a year. She'll just change her name, move to a different city, undertake a new identity, and get paid under the table. And that's how she lives. And she's just always hoping to stay a step ahead of the men who wish her harm. And then through the course of the novel, she learns that she actually has some sort of an interesting connection to the Lizzie Borden story. And so that's when I'm able to take those two very different chronologies and make them meet in a way.
And I suppose that there's been a lot of, hindsight over the years since the Borden murders took place, and people have been able to kind of go back and look at things through more of a modern eye and look at things over the passage of time as more information has come out than that might have been available at the time of the murders. Do you kind of use the novel and having that 21st century connection as part of the storytelling? Do you use that as a way to kind of look back to what happened, to what Bridget Sullivan went through? Do you put it through that lens, or are you telling everything on her side through her eyes and through her experiences in that time period?
Well, one of the things that I would just love is to have a psychologist go through these court transcripts and all of the papers around this case and give us their determination as to what Lizzie's state of mind was. So I think what's wonderful about the plethora of Lizzie Borden novels and even the nonfiction that's out there is that everybody has a slightly different take on the motivations behind the murders, if in fact those murders were committed by Lizzie. As we all know, she was acquitted. And so that's what's really satisfying to me, is that I came up with what I felt was my historically accurate motivation for Lizzie's murdering of her father and stepmother. And I made sure that my book was in galley form. In other words, it was being printed at the printer before I ever went to another novel about the Lizzie Borden case to read it, because I didn't want to be swayed or subconsciously influenced by other authors' ideas of what her motivations could have been. So I wanted to do it cleanly, and then once I had mine sort of packed up tight, then it was really fun to go and start reading back through some of the recent and older novels about Lizzie. I'm sure you've read pretty much everything that there is out there.
And there's so many different theories, so many different ideas, so many different possible motivations. You know, I've heard everything from, that Lizzie and Bridget were involved in some sort of lesbian relationship, and I've heard things about the Victoria Lincoln theory, where Lizzie had she was kind of schizophrenic and epileptic, and so there's all these theories that are out there, and the thing is you can put any theory you want out there because we're never going to know who's right and who's wrong. Right.
Yeah, that's what's fun about it, is that there is no totally right or wrong about it. I've heard that the movie that filmed this year, and we're waiting for it to be released, does take that tack that Lizzie and Bridget were involved romantically, and that was part of the motivation behind the murders.
It's a salacious story.
I didn't take that tack. It's really interesting to me to see how some portions of the case that are kind of important, you just decide not to use it, or you sort of give it low impact in your book. For instance, I've also seen it the other way, like things that I felt like were really key components, and I really devoted chapters to it. Others just kind of, glance at it and let it go. One of those things for me was the incident where Lizzie laughed on the staircase as Bridget was trying to let in Mr. Borden, while Mrs. Borden was already lying dead on the guest room floor. And to me, that was the single most chilling detail of the case, was that she's just standing there for no reason, like a mad woman, laughing in full view of, if she turned her head and looked, of Mrs. Borden's corpse. And so I used that scene, and the book sort of circles around and touches back on it a couple of times. And yet, when I read other people's books, sometimes they don't seem to find that particular detail as compelling. And vice versa. I've read some books where I was like, oh, that's kind of cool that you picked up on that and amplified it and made it larger, whereas I just decided not to use it that much or focus on it.
It is hard, though, as somebody who has researched this case myself for a long time now, it is hard to, at least from the paranormal aspect, I know when you just want to open up a transcript or somebody else's novel, maybe Parallel Lives, if you want to, use that as a source, or all these different things to help you build these characters, you're getting a lot of straight factual information, but there's been a lot of conjecture over the years. There's been a lot of stuff that has become part of the legend of Lizzie Borden that might not actually have been true, but that has just become commonly accepted because so many people just keep regurgitating it.
Yes, that's really frustrating when you even find details that two different sources absolutely contradict each other over, and you're like, well, which one's more trustworthy? And I think also there's an issue with 1800s language and like what things meant, because sometimes when you're reading a court transcript and you come across a line that one of the people spoke, its meaning has been kind of lost to time, and you're like, I don't really understand what they're saying here. And it's not just a question of like the vocabulary of the time, because that's very easy to look up, but it's like phraseology or just, I don't know. And I wish I could think of a specific instance of where this happened, where I was like, it's lost to us in our year 2017. We don't understand what they meant by this.
There's also the other problem where I think that we've kind of wanted the story to fit certain narratives over the years as well. I think that people have come up with theories, and because they have a theory and that's what they're going to put their money behind, figuratively speaking, that they want to try to morph the story to fit into that particular theory. And that doesn't really do the actual events that happened on that day or leading up to that day any justice.
Yeah, I think so. And that may be part of what I was saying, like you pick and choose the details that you amplify and the ones that you kind of push under the carpet, because
or just completely make up.
Details better support what you're trying to do with the story, and some don't.
I mean, some people just completely make up stories. The story that I remember being the big thing, because we deal with the paranormal stuff, so we hear a lot of stuff that comes from psychics and mediums that go in there. And one of the big stories that was coming out when we first got involved with the house was the idea that Andrew and Lizzie had an inappropriate relationship, and that Lizzie got pregnant on 2 occasions, and that Dr. Bowen across the street came over and he actually performed the well, Stephanie's saying 4, but either way, he came over from across the street, performed abortions. The bodies were the fetuses were supposedly buried under the wash basin in the basement. All these details that have come out that nobody really knew was true. It was just something that was kind of commonly shared without any factual basis.
Has anybody ever looked for?
Moniz took some of it. He wanted to try and look for mitochondrial DNA, but it's a very expensive process, and there's anything that would have been there is already gone. So because it wasn't like it was a human baby that was already born and would have bones, it would have been. Well, I turned you down because you were typing very loud.
Oh my gosh,
That's
yeah,
his
that
mouse.
is.
Huh?
That's his mouse.
That's a tough one.
No, but when you were typing earlier, that's when I turned it down.
When I went through the house, I had heard the incest theory before, and I guess I felt like if Mr. Borden had been guilty of that, then sure, go ahead and murder him. As far as I'm concerned, that is justice. But I also felt like if he hadn't, then his version of hell has just been worsened because he's accused of this thing that is just so brutal and horrific. And I still think of he and Mrs. Borden as victims. And so I had felt like I wasn't going to go down that road just because I didn't know, and I didn't want to slander his name if I wasn't sure. And so during the tour guide had pointed out the nails that were the nail holes between Lizzie's bedroom and Mr. Borden's, and that several psychologists who had toured the house said, "Oh yeah, this is classic. This is textbook. There's no doubt about it." Based on that, and I asked her privately. I said, "What's the other support for that theory?" And she said, "The ring that Mr. Borden wore that Lizzie had given him, and that Hiram, that relative of theirs, had said that they had an unnatural and too close relationship. That those were the 3 bits of evidence." And I don't know how you feel, but I just didn't think it was enough for me to dive into that.
Well,
So I mentioned it in my author's note. I mean, that's the happy thing about historical fiction is you can always sort of explain things in the end, like, why did I choose not to go this route? I want to acknowledge that I was aware of this theory, but I didn't want to write it into the novel. The author's note is just such a great tool for letting readers know.
I mean, sure, when you're dealing with trying to present an accurate historical picture, you can say that that's not enough to go on, and I commend you for that, but it's certainly been enough for TV shows to show up and psychics to show up and paranormal investigators to show up and everybody. I mean, I know that every time I go to that house, if I mention the I word, I can cause all kinds of stuff to happen paranormally. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it was true. It just means that the idea that people are talking about it are getting the spirits riled up enough to react.
Do you feel like there is residue in the house from Lizzie herself?
I'm not exactly sure if Lizzie herself is there because I don't think that she would have any reason to want to be attached to it. I do think that in general ghost theory, I think the spirits of people who were murdered will stick around in the place where they were murdered just because of the shock of the event that happens. But our theory, and we've been doing a lot of research into this over the last just about 12 years now, is that there's actually something darker there. And I'm not using the D word, but there's something that's like a negative energy there that's always been there before the Bordens were there. And I think
that's so interesting.
That's what I think is pretending to be the Bordens for a lot of people.
Well, wasn't there truth that there were some things that happened prior to the Bordens living there?
There were.
That a woman tried killing her kids, throwing them
I'm
in a
actually
well?
kind of losing you. I can't hear you right now.
I think, yeah, it's we have some other folks in the studio, and I think that their microphones don't carry over the phone as well. But John, one of my co-hosts, was mentioning the story of Andrew's relatives that live next door, where the mother tried to kill her children and succeeded in killing 2 of them and then took her own life. And that happening before the Borden murders.
She was related to the Bordens, though, wasn't she?
She was Andrew's cousin, niece or cousin?
I
forget.
can't remember, but she was related in.
Oh, I think there's
I'll try and boost it up.
demonic interference.
Hey, you never know.
I'm hearing.
I mean, this isn't unusual for this type of conversation about this entity either. So.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. When we do talk about this topic, we have some problems. That's for
Right.
sure. But if anybody else asks a question and you can't hear it, Eric, I'll just repeat the question for you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I was just going to say that when I first decided, well, actually, I was encouraged by my editor to go stay overnight at the house. I was reluctant to, but my editor really felt I should, especially because my modern day character does stay in the house, and there's several scenes set during that tour, so it was important for me to go. And I initially approached somebody very, very close to me to be the person to accompany me because I didn't think I could stay there by myself. And this person mentioned the fear of demons as a reason not to stay there, and feeling very vulnerable to that kind of influence. And so instead I had a really good old college friend stay with me. And I have to say our stay was very uneventful. I did have a really horrific nightmare, which related back to the next door neighbors, the well in the basement story. But other than that, I didn't feel anything there, and I felt things other places.
So you had a nightmare while you were there?
Yeah, I woke up in the morning, and you recall that the upstairs, I guess it's the Hosea Knowlton room, or maybe it's the one next to it, that the closet is supposed to have some kind of energy in it, and
that's the room with
the wire hangers.
The room with the chimney in the middle?
In the night. So I had a dream. I slept in Bridget's room, and I had a dream that I opened up the closet in Bridget's room, and there was a naked child cowered there in the dark, and she was, I think, 9 years old or thereabouts, which I think is the age of the oldest child who managed to escape her mother next door. So I think that was all kind of linked.
I mean, the third floor is said to be pretty much the domain of those child spirits. And
but why is that?
I don't know. I mean, the only thing that I can think of is that it's close. It's close to where their murders happened. It's on the same property. And if I was speculating, I would say because they were taken, it was the basin in the basement of the other house where they were drowned, right? And was it outside or was it in the basement?
In the basement.
So maybe by staying on the third floor of that house, they're as far away from the basement as could be. It's the only thing I can think of. Or maybe whatever is there, because whatever is there, this dark thing, it definitely lives in the basement. I've seen it, I've encountered it, I've smelled it, I've gone to battle with it, and so maybe they just stay up there so that they can stay as far away from that as they can.
Well, that sounds like a reasonable theory. I know that when I showed up, I was actually very relieved to be staying on the only floor of the house where murders had not occurred. And then, of course, the first thing that our tour guide says to us is, "Oh, you're staying in the most haunted floor of the house." And I was like, wait a minute. That was not my plan. And I do have to say, staying in Bridget's room, anytime anybody uses that bathroom next door, it feels like it sounds like they're coming into your room because of the way the acoustics work with the door latches. So, we pretty much shrieked every time somebody went to the bathroom in the night.
Well, and
because it felt like somebody was coming into our room.
And Bridget's room is kind of a very odd room to be in anyway, because the way the angles go, the floor slopes downward, the ceiling slopes downward over by the closet. So you're dealing with a very much a funhouse effect when you're in that room, because you just don't ever seem to really get your bearings in there.
Yeah, it makes me think of Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House when she talks about how the angles aren't exactly 90-degree angles, or the house doesn't meet its corners correctly, or something like that. It is definitely an off-putting room design.
And we have done a lot of, especially lately, we just did an event there. Stephanie and I did an event there, was it back in September? I think it was
September 23rd, yes.
So yeah, back in September we did an event there, and we called it a mixture of old school and new school investigating. And so we did some of the modern stuff with some of the modern equipment, but we also did some of the same Victorian era spiritualism approach to investigation that they would have used back then. And so one of the things that we did is mirror gazing, and we had people doing that in Bridget Sullivan's room, and there was some freaky stuff happening for people there. So that room definitely has an energy.
Wow, that is really scary because I used to really spook myself out as a child doing that, brushing my teeth and just kind of letting your focus go blurry as you look into the mirror. And I don't think I would have the bravery to do that in the Borden household.
Well, I didn't say I did.
In fact, I remember when I would use the upstairs bathroom, I would just very quickly kind of not look in the mirror, just kind of breeze past it.
I try to avoid mirrors in haunted places.
Keep my hands looking at the basin.
Well, I do have to take a really quick break for about 30 seconds. We're going to reset some stuff with the video, and then we'll come back with more with our guest, Erika Mailman. She's the author of The Murderer's Maid, and we'll tell you when we come back in just a moment where you can pick up the book. And we'll also talk some more about her research, and we'll talk some more about what else she has coming on. So we'll be back in about 30 seconds.
All right, thank you.